Hi everyone, welcome back. Happy Friday. You made it through the week. Yay. I know this week was kind of struggle bus for me. But again, we're here on Friday and I'm still working on grades. I'll have it. I'm after this during office hours if I have time. I'm going to really make a push for that. But yeah. So if you have Top Hat on right now, then please log in. And we do have some like little fun activities because this Friday is pretty like yeah, let's wind the week down, all right? So let's finish up with bone tissues and cover things that wanted to cover the last lecture, and then finally start on the actual skeleton itself. Okay, so let's start with the skeletal system, but first let's cover vitamins, hormones, and bones. This is one subject I always want to cover every semester, and it always seems like I run out of time, but I'll do it real quick. So vitamins and bone growth. Yeah, it's bone season. Yeah, that's true. It's spooky season. It's finally October. So yeah, it's October is great because it's a festive month, but at the same time we don't get any holidays. So but at least we have the Thanksgiving next month. All right. So the main vitamins involved in bone growth are vitamin D, more specifically vitamin D3, vitamin C, vitamin K, and vitamin B12. Really quickly, why are they important? Vitamin D we'll save for later on in the lecture. There's a reason behind that. But vitamin C and bone, you might be like, wait, I know vitamin D is really important for bones, but vitamin C, and not coincidentally, vitamin C is very important in the synthesis of a major protein of connective tissue. More specifically, vitamin C stimulates collagen synthesis, so it's not just important for like skin health, but it's also important for bone health. And you might wait, collagen, like dense connective tissue, like our tendons. Well, if you remember, go all the way back to our first bone lecture. Well, collagen, remember that bone is a structural connective tissue. It is a supportive connective tissue. So with the connective tissue, you have a matrix, right? So with the matrix, you have solid protein fibers plus some ground substance. So the ground substance of bone matrix is the minerals, but collagen is the main protein fiber in bone matrix. And over here we have a diagram. And what you can see is that the collagen fibers actually run through these lamellae that you find in those compact bone, what we call osteons. So these little units right here, the collagen fibers are woven this way, crisscross, and enveloped in that bone mineral. So that's why you need vitamin C for healthy bones. Now vitamin K. So vitamin kale, vitamin kimchi, you find it in like fermented foods, and also leafy greens as well. So why is vitamin K important? Well, it's actually pretty molecular based, but you need to make these calcium binding proteins. Now, do I want you to know osteocalcin, which is a type of hormone made by osteoblasts, and matrix GLA protein? Don't worry about knowing those. Those are, especially that's latter, the MGP, that's pretty hardcore cell biology, so I don't expect you to know that. But why is vitamin K important? Well, the interesting thing is that osteoblasts have these enzymes and hormones they secrete. And in order to make these enzymes and hormones, they actually need vitamin K to synthesize these enzymes and hormones. So that's pretty much what it is. Just know that osteoblasts need vitamin K for their normal function. And remember, osteoblasts build new matrix. Now, vitamin B12 and bone is very interesting because vitamin B12 is pretty well established, like in multiple journals. Like if somebody has a diet lacking vitamin B12, then they have a loss in bone density. So they know that vitamin B12 is needed for bone health. But exactly why? Well, they know that osteoblasts require vitamin B12, but exactly what they do with vitamin B12, last time I checked, they're still studying it. So we know that if you don't have it, you have poor bone health and density. But what exactly does B12 do? And this is very interesting too. For those of you going to nutrition, is that the easiest sources of vitamin B12 are proteins and animal proteins, so like eggs and cheese and all sorts of meats. So people on a strictly vegan diet, like vegetarians, you can eat cheese and eggs, but people who are vegan, they're more restricted. I think there are some sources like they say yeast and was it like nori seaweed and shiitake mushrooms. So maybe if you but it's your options are a lot more limited if you're vegan. That's why B12 often needs to be people on that diet. They need to supplement their diet because their sources of B12 are very like limited. But does that mean that like yeah, it's impossible? I mean, you can still find sources. Okay, so let's put vitamin D on the shelf for now. We'll get back to it. But what about hormones? So hormones, thyroxine, so that's a major active form of thyroid hormones. So there's several forms of thyroid hormones like T3 and T4. But thyroid hormones is something we cover more in detail for next semester in PHYL 142 when we cover the endocrine system in detail. So don't worry too much about that for now. But it is a thyroid produced by the thyroid gland, and it has actually many, many functions. It's pretty much almost every cell in your body responds to thyroid hormones, but bones need that. So if you have thyroid hormones, it stimulates bone growth. Growth hormone, makes sense, like pretty easy. So growth hormone, actually, it's not just bone growth. And if you know someone who's like had the like one of my childhood friends, like he was like I guess below in the maybe the lower quartile in his growth, and the doctor prescribed him growth hormone, and then he grew the same height as me eventually, even though he was like I think maybe beginning of high school he was like under 5 feet. Now he's the same height as me. But growth hormone, yeah, very important for growing soft or connective tissues, including bone. And then sex hormones, and two main categories of the sex hormones are estrogens, and estrogens aren't exclusive to only females. Men do have estrogens as well, and same with androgens. So androgens is a primary male sex hormone, but women or females have it as well. So sex hormones are also important with bone growth, and all these I listed right here, they stimulate bone growth and or density. So they're all important for developing healthy bone. And so what we have here, so this guy is, I forgot his name, but he has gigantism, and look at him. Oh, he's tall back in the day, and it's like, yeah, look at those long, long bones. And then this guy, he has a condition called acromegaly, and they both involve an excess of growth hormone, abnormal excess of growth hormone above normal levels. What's the difference? Well, it depends on when this excess growth hormone occurred. So gigantism is pretty much used when you have excess growth hormone in childhood, but in acromegaly, that's like you had a normal amounts of growth hormone, but then they start to spike in adulthood. How tall am I? I know, I was like, ooh. Yeah, I'm only 5'6". I know I can't play basketball. Yeah, okay, so first top hat question. Or I could play top hat or basketball, but I think Muggsy Bogues maybe like probably can't play in the NBA. Okay. Let's see. All right, let's do our first top hat question of the day. So one of these bones is healthy, so click on the healthy bone. So one is healthy and one has a pathological condition. In other words, it has some sort of disease. Which do you think is healthy? Click on the healthy one. B12 and caffeine and energy drinks. You know, the thing with caffeine is I have to read up on what the latest thing. Like they used to think like, oh, or if you've had parents growing up that said that don't drink coffee, it'll stunt your growth. And vitamin B12, is there a correlation? I mean, I think caffeine and growth and its effect on hormones and bone. I mean, caffeine also affects sleep as well, and sleep also is important for growth. So it's like one of those things that's hard to tease out. I should check what the latest. I think there's probably studies happening for this all the time, and I would probably have to look at the latest reviews to see like, okay, does caffeine actually affect bone growth? Oh, I didn't add a timer. Well, let's not waste too much time, but let's see what people said. All right, so what are the responses? And let's see what people. So most of you clicked A. Ooh, where did it go? There it is. Okay, most of you clicked A, and what about this? So A is correct, because what do you notice about B? It looks very brittle. It looks like it doesn't have as much mass. So B has a specific condition. And in fact, that condition is called osteoporosis. Now, you may have heard of osteoporosis, and our next top hat question, what can cause osteoporosis? Fill in the blank. And actually, there's multiple possible answers. I probably don't have all of them listed, but there are many different causes of osteoporosis. There was a patient who lacked in vitamin B12 and went temporarily blind as a result until he incorporated it again into his diet. Yeah, so with like vitamin D, C, K, and B12 and the B vitamins, it's not just about bone health, but they also affect a lot of other things as well. Same with the hormones we just talked about. They're not just involved with bones specifically. They can also affect other tissues, like especially estrogens and androgens. I mean, they're reproductive hormones, so they're going to affect a lot of things. Same with thyroxine. I mean, that if there's any imbalance in your thyroid hormones, you are going to feel it all over your body. What was the other one we talked about? Let's see, vitamin 3. Oh, yeah, and growth hormone. Yeah, if you have imbalance with growth hormone, that definitely causes a lot of things. Okay, what can cause osteoporosis? And let's see what responses are. Low calcium. Yeah, that's correct, correct. Yeah. You know, actually, I'm not even going to say the correct answers because I think almost everything I'm seeing so far is correct. So there are many things that can cause osteoporosis. So great job, everybody. I mean, it looks like wear and tear, not enough vitamins. Yeah, these are all great responses and possible causes of osteoporosis. So yeah, trypophobia. I know my better half has that too. Is like, yeah, it's kind of funny. Like certain foods or certain like rock formations look really creepy to people with that trypophobia. I mean, I know like there's no trypophobia in the DSM-5, but I don't know. It seems like people who have it, they get really creeped out by that. So yeah, A is what we see like a diagram of healthy bone, but osteoporosis, you notice that the trabeculae are thinner, you see less of the bone mineral, and overall the pockets are bigger. So osteoporosis, by having less bone mineral and matrix, it's weaker, it's more brittle. Now, what can cause this osteoporosis? Well, what's a common cause? And I think some of you mentioned that in the top hat question. So yeah, what are all these women experiencing? And no, they're not like Goku and going Super Saiyan. They're feeling hot and they're feeling these hot flashes. And when do these hot flashes occur? Some of these might be occurring in your mother if they're of the certain age. And this is when they're undergoing menopause. So during a female's life, what happens is that, this is approximate estrogen levels on average during life, and this is puberty, so this is where you get a spike in estrogen production. But as a woman ovulates and there's less and less follicles that contain the ova, these estrogen levels drop until they are pretty low compared to when she was ovulating. So this is what we call menopause, and estrogen is important for bone growth. And the thing is that what happens when your estrogen drops? Well, the estrogens are important for bone growth and density, so if you have a drop in estrogen, you also lose that density and that protective properties of bone. But is this exclusive to women? Well, bad news, guys. We also experience a drop in our sex hormones as we age as well. I mean, there's still some, and here we have like free testosterone is the testosterone that's available for our cells to our circulation to diffuse into our cells and activate those pathways and changes that occur with testosterone. But what you notice, even though they're kind of like has a box and whiskers plot, overall men drop and their free testosterone drops with age. Yeah, so I'm probably further along than all of the other guys in the class. But the thing is that this is not as drastic as females, but it is a drop. So why do we talk about this? Well, estrogens, so there are actually multiple estrogens. Estradiol is the primary one, but it is a group of female sex hormones. Same with androgens. There's actually more male sex hormones than like DHT or androstenedione. There are many types of estrogens and many types of androgens, so there are categories of steroid hormones. But these are the primary sex hormones. And then what we have, remember our osteoblasts, they build new matrix, osteoclast crush matrix. Well, what do estrogens and androgens do to osteoblasts? They have similar effects on osteoblasts, and mainly they're going to increase the activity of osteoblasts. So this means that the estrogens and androgens increase the building of new bone matrix. So when do we get a surge of estrogens and androgens through our life cycle? Hey, maybe during puberty, right? So if you get a surge in estrogens and androgens, you're going to be building new bone matrix at a faster rate. So that's one of the main reasons behind our growth spurt. But since we have these high levels of estrogens and androgens, we're now starting to catch up to the building of cartilage in our epiphyseal plates and growth plates. So eventually this is why we stop growing, because if with this boost of all these hormones that promote bone growth, eventually we totally solidify our epiphyseal plates. And then what do they do to osteoclasts? Well, just the opposite. So sex hormones not only increase the activity of osteoblasts, they also downregulate the activity of osteoclasts. So you're increasing the builders, but telling the crushers to calm down. So you can bring in the construction crews, but telling the demolition crew to take it easy. Don't crush what we just built up. And then what was it? So the things that, remember, with estrogen, or not estrogen, but with menopause and andropause, we see a decrease in these sex hormones with age. And so if you have a decrease with sex hormones, what happens to the activity of the osteoblasts and osteoclasts? Well, the osteoblasts lose their boost in their activity, and now the osteoclasts aren't held back because they're not being bombarded with these sex hormones. Now they're free to take over. So now osteoclasts become dominant over osteoblasts as we age because of this drop in sex hormones as we age. So this is why people who are older are more prone to osteoporosis. Osteomalacia. Oh, do you mean osteomalacia? So that also deals with vitamins as well. And andropause, a cause of ED. So yeah, that's like something for like next semester. But yeah, andropause, I mean, this is why women get hot flashes. Like estrogen is also important in triggering the hypothalamus and also like the perception of temperature as well. So the thing is that these are more than just bone hormones. They're also very important they have system-wide effects throughout your whole body. So this is why this is one of the changes that occurs with aging. And yeah, so this but again, the drop and the plummet is more severe in women, so that's why on average they're more prone to osteoporosis than men. Or actually, my mom, she has she doesn't, or does she have osteoporosis? She didn't have osteoporosis, but she did lose bone density, and it's funny because I think she was 5'2", and then one time I was like, oh, was she always that height? And I think she actually shrunk like 1.5 inches, so now she's just barely over 5'0". But yeah, so this is a natural cause of a natural effect of aging. So another important part of bones is that they store calcium for the body. So the thing is that bones are not just there to hold to form the structure and a sort of scaffold for your body and to anchor your muscles. They're also like a deposit or repository for calcium. So you can actually shift calcium ions to the bone. So if you have too much calcium in your blood, you can store it to a certain extent onto your bone. But say you have a lack of calcium in your blood and your fluids in your body, well, you can actually take your cells and those osteoclasts. They're not important, or they're not just important in breaking down damaged bone, but they're also the cells that withdraw bone or calcium from bone and release it back into your bloodstream. So what we have here is calcium is also very important. If you're going to molecular and cell biology, calcium is actually very important in terms of protein function, and especially this protein called calmodulin. Don't worry about that for this class. But calcium is also important for excitable cells. So a lot of your neurons need calcium, especially in neurotransmitters. Calcium is essential. And also for your muscles. When we get to muscle tissue, you find out that without calcium, your muscles can't contract. And not only is it skeletal muscles here, but a very important big muscle that you need to stay alive depends on calcium as well for its proper function. So this is why you need to maintain a normal level of calcium. So again, that homeostasis, you don't want too much because hypercalcemia can cause ill effects, but having too little calcium also has its dangers as well. So you're able to actually, your cells are able to kind of deposit extra calcium onto bone and withdraw calcium if it's needed from bone. And notice that so this is a composition of bone, but in terms of the overall percentage of these minerals and ions in your body, notice that bone contains pretty much almost all of your body's calcium, 99%, and same with phosphate. So if your cells, your body's other tissues or your blood is lacking in calcium or phosphate, this is why another reason why you need those osteoclasts to help free the calcium and phosphate and deposit it into your blood so it can circulate to where it's needed in the body. Now let's talk about a new molecule called calcitriol. And hey, you throw it back to chapter 5 with the skin and integument. So 7-dehydrocholesterol, this is what happens when you have UV exposure in your skin. What vitamin does that make? It makes vitamin D, right? So vitamin D, this is why people say, I'm going to make vitamin D and when they go out to the beach. So yeah, the vitamin D is like synthesized via UV light exposure. But things that calcitriol, it has to undergo more chemical reactions. Don't worry too much about the exact chemical structures because again, this is not organic chemistry class nor a biochemistry class. But you should know that you need vitamin D3 to make calcitriol. So calcitriol is needed. So this is another reason why you need vitamin D3. Now, what does calcitriol do? Well, calcitriol is made by the kidneys via that biochemical pathway we showed earlier. But again, pathways I'll save for your more advanced classes. And it's made from vitamin D3. Again, made from your skin. Typical major source of that is exposure to UV light. So really, maybe I just hang around really nerdy people. Maybe that's why I heard someone say, I'm going to go to the beach to make vitamin D. Okay, so then what we have is so when you have the calcitriol, what it does, or actually, I have another slide. Let me skip over this. So typically what happens with calcium absorption, so when you digest food, what happens is that you digest into smaller and smaller particles. So as your food goes through your digestive tract, if it has calcium, it gets absorbed by your intestines and enters your bloodstream. So the calcium from your diet can end up in your bloodstream. So what happens if you add calcitriol to that? So this is what we saw without calcitriol. You're still going to absorb calcium from your diet. So calcitriol is made from your kidneys, it's made from vitamin D3, and the calcitriol made by your kidneys targets your digestive system. So what does it do to your digestive system? Well, you're going to digest your food, but compared to that normal amount of calcium you absorb, it's actually going to increase your absorption of calcium and phosphate. So same food, but now you're going to increase the yield of calcium that comes from your food. So more calcium absorbed from your food, more calcium in your blood. So calcitriol is actually very important for increasing the amount of calcium in your blood. So the cool thing is that, where do you find a lot of vitamin D3 or foods with vitamin D? They tend to be, or this is why you might also see milk fortified with vitamin D3. They basically want to up your calcium absorption by kind of taking advantage of this effect. So increasing the rate of absorption of calcium from your food. And it also increases the rate reabsorption of calcium from the blood. So the thing is that next semester you'll find out especially that your blood is constantly filtered through the kidneys, but there's always a risk of anything in your blood being lost and filtered out through your kidneys and secreted into your urine. So the thing is that your kidneys are not just important in making urine, but also reclaiming things so that nutrients and ions and things you actually need don't get thrown out with the rest of the urine. And then let's talk about these two hormones called calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. Now don't get confused. Calcitriol may look like calcitonin, but there are two completely different hormones. And so this is where the thyroid gland, and same one that makes thyroxine that we mentioned earlier. And then in the back we have these these four small bean-shaped glands called the parathyroid glands. So if you took this out and flipped that around to look at the back surface, that's what you would see. Yep, so what we would see is that, okay, so parathyroid hormone, what parathyroid hormone does is it's made by these parathyroid glands, and I'm abbreviating PTH, common abbreviation. So here's the osteoclast, and what parathyroid hormone does to osteoclasts, it actually increases the activity of osteoclasts. Remember, osteoclasts crush bone matrix, and when they crush it down, they release calcium ions. So the calcium ions are going to end up in your bloodstream. And then what does parathyroid hormone do to your digestive tract? It's going to increase the absorption of calcium from your food. So it's not just calcitriol. Parathyroid hormone also increases your calcium absorption. And then where does that end up? In your blood. And then it also targets the kidneys. It actually stimulates the kidneys to make more calcitriol, and as in the previous slides we showed that calcitriol increases your absorption of calcium and increases your overall blood levels of calcium. So it's going to further add another boost to the calcium absorption. So what do you notice? You have a lot of calcium flooding into your blood when you have parathyroid hormone secretion. So when there isn't an increase in calcium absorption, where does the extra calcium go? So that's the cool thing about your kidneys. If you have excess of some ions, or your kidneys are very important in getting rid of that excess. So your kidneys, it's more than just making urine. Your kidneys are actually very important in balancing out the chemistry of your blood and your bodily fluids as well. And I guess if it's not absorbed in your food, in your digestive tract, yeah, extra calcium can end up being wasted. Like, even though our digestive system tries to absorb as much nutrients as possible, if there isn't much stimulus to absorb more nutrients, maybe some of this excess nutrients just ends up excreted from our body, either through number one or number two, urine or feces. Yep. Another thing is that you can store the extra calcium in the body as well. So the cool thing about parathyroid hormone is that, again, your blood is always being filtered by your kidneys. But if you have parathyroid hormone there, it's going to tell the kidneys, hey, don't let go of this calcium yet. Let's recycle it, put it back into the fluids. Because the thing is that you have blood flow to your kidneys, but you also have blood flow from your kidneys. So you're going to have the calcium riding to the kidneys, but it's going to just do a UE and come back if there's a lot of parathyroid hormone. Now calcitonin, so the interesting thing about not every hormone, but a lot of hormones, they work as pairs. And when they work as pairs, they kind of counteract each other. Parathyroid hormone and calcitonin are a pair that work against each other. So what calcitonin does is it tells, so parathyroid hormone tells osteoclasts to crush and increase their activity. Calcitonin does the exact opposite. It tells the osteoclasts, hey, calm down, we don't need you anymore. So the osteoclasts, they take a break and you don't have a reabsorption of bone. And then for what it does to the digestive tract, so calcitonin is going to reduce calcium absorption. So you're going to get less calcium from your food if you have increased calcitonin secretion. And what does it do to the kidneys? Well, it decreases calcitriol, so you lose the bonus calcium absorption from calcitriol. But not only does it reduce calcitriol, it also increases the secretion of calcium through your urine. So it doesn't have, instead of recycling your calcium back into your blood, now it's going to excrete more calcium. So what's the big difference? Notice that in the previous example with parathyroid hormone, we had increased calcium in the blood. Calcitonin, on the other hand, it basically got rid of all this calcium. So what does parathyroid do? Parathyroid increases blood calcium. Calcitonin decreases blood calcium. So another nice mnemonic that I learned was parathy makes calcium high, calcito makes calcium low. So this is the parathyroid hormone, calcitonin, they counterbalance each other. But again, you want the normal levels of calcium in your blood because too much causes ill effects, and too little too much or too little can actually be deadly. So homeostasis is very important. Okay, so in the time we have left, let's talk about bone shapes. Let's go back to top hat. Okay, and this one, let's hopefully it works. It's going to be an interesting format. It will be, next question. Okay, draw any bone. And don't worry, it's not showing who drew what, but oh, someone labeled it. Oh, I think I see a clavicle, a femur. Oh, I see a sesamoid bone. I see a patella. Maybe a scapula? Long bone. Oh, cute. This is spooky season after all. Yeah, so we're seeing all these bone shapes. Oh, someone drew a vertebrae. Nice. Okay, yeah, this is our little drawing activity. And this is, again, this is another way I like to study anatomy, is doing drawings, because you have to say, oh, did I include all the structures of these bones or muscles as well? Okay, neat. Okay, alright, so let's move on. Yeah, so what I saw are a lot of, if you ask someone who's not studying anatomy and someone on the street to, hey, let's make a bone, or let's draw me a bone, you'll probably see a lot of this. Oh, I can't see this response canvas. What the hell? Oh. Let's see, maybe I have to show the other. Yeah, so these are all the bones I'm seeing right now. Neat skulls. Okay. Let's go back to our presentation. So we see a lot of bones. And then bone shapes. So let's talk about different shapes of bones. Oh, no. Wait, oh, it's reversing. Okay, so most people, they would draw a doggy bone, right? Or something like this. Well, if you played this and like, you're in the control room, you're doing that memory game where you're pressing all the buttons, what inevitably happens? Well, you end up like this. But so it's like interesting anatomy of these crewmates, right? So do they have one bone and just sticks out like that? And the thing is that, do any of the bones in your body actually look like that? Probably not. So this kind of symmetrical long bone is like this, or like a doggy chew toy bone. It doesn't really exist in our body. None of our body's bones really look like that. So yeah, this is why. So if it was more anatomically correct, it would look more like this. But yeah, no bones in your body actually looks like that. Okay, so then so when you see this doggy bone, people are trying to draw some sort of long bone. And then what we have here, oh, look at this. And don't worry, this definitely isn't a human bone, or if it is a human bone, I would like to see the original human, and actually that would be really twisted giving it to a doggy. But what you see is that these bones, they have different ends. Like the proximal end of a long bone that's closer to the body is typically different from the distal end of a bone. And here we have a femur. So again, the femur doesn't, even though it's long and it does have these projections, it's not going to be, you see this end right here of the femur is not the same as this end, distal end over here. So what we see with the tibia and fibula, notice that this end right here, that's more proximal, isn't exactly identical to the distal end. And same with the long bones in our feet, or in our phalanges, and in both our hands and our feet. Notice that these ends are not symmetrical to each other. So there is no real like completely symmetrical bones. It's kind of like when people draw this type of heart versus an anatomical heart. The stylized version isn't exact. It's cute. It makes for cool designs, but there's no actual bone like that. Okay, so then these bones over here, these are short bones. So long bones are what we typically associate with those doggy bones. Short bones are more cuboidal or kind of round or kind of look like little rocks. So the bones that make up your wrist, the carpal bones, and the bones in your ankles, they are the tarsal bones. They are classified as short bones. So they don't really have this elongated shape we see in our phalanges. And if you go to a museum, one of the first ways they created dice was actually carving these bones and making them into cubes. So I think that's where they originated that term rolling the bones when they say throwing dice. I don't know who actually uses it that day, but I mean, I think I've seen it like old cartoons. But yeah, old bones were made out of these. They used to be made out of these short bones of animals. And then flat bones. So they're approximately flat. So they're not going to be super flat, like completely flat like a sheet of paper. But compared to long bones, which are kind of cylindrical and lengthened, and short bones, which are kind of like rocky and kind of like shaped like very, very rough cubes, the sternum, the scapula, and these bones of your skull that we're going to cover pretty soon, these are flat bones. And even though the ribs are curved, they're considered flat bones as well. And then sesamoid bones, they sound like sesame, right? So this is where they kind of get their name. So these are sesame seeds, and this is the patella that several of you drew. And sesamoid bones are interesting because, granted, almost everybody has a patella. There are very rare cases where someone is born without it. But it's interesting, like especially sesamoid bones, they're kind of acting as little like pulleys or levers that add extra strength and to a joint. So, or actually improve the efficiency of a joint movement. And what do these percentages mean? Now, don't worry about just memorizing these straight percentages. What it's showing you is the frequency that you find sesamoid bones at these joints in the human population. So pretty much almost everybody has a sesamoid bone here. That's why it's 100%. But in these other sense, like maybe more, just over half, maybe about half of us have a sesamoid bone here, but very few of us have sesamoid bones there. So people, I mean, the classic number for how many bones do you have in your body, they say 206, but if you're including sesamoid bones, then it can actually vary a bit. So sometimes you might have extra bones, these extra sesamoid bones, or you might not have one of these bones. So this is what's kind of cool about them. And then another type of bone that you may or may not have are what we call sutural bones or Wormian bones. So here are the sutures that join the major bones of your cranium and skull. And when you think of sutures, you probably think, okay, stitches and sutures. And this is what they're kind of like. So these sutures kind of stitch these bones together of your skull together. Now, what can happen is that when these bones are fusing, because again, our bones aren't completely fused when we're born, or actually our bones fuse while we're developing in the womb, and they aren't complete. So when they're kind of closing up on each other, sometimes it can actually not form it doesn't form a complete seam like we see above here. So this is a suture, but instead of like just forming one line, it kind of formed this like almost like a little island of bone. And so these are the sutures, but an extra bone formed where there should be just one line. So this is something that you might have and not even realize you have it. So these are extra bones we see here. So yeah, these right here, these are all Wormian bones or sutural bones. So it's kind of like an extra bone in your skull, or may or may not exist. Okay, so then there are some bones that the anatomists just gave up and they just said, okay, this doesn't quite fit any of those other categories. Let's just call them irregular. So that's what we have with the regular bone. Here we have the ethmoid bone, and here we have. So this is interesting. I've seen some textbooks call the coxal bone, the hip bones, flat or other type of bones, but according to Martini, they consider it irregular. And this is something, whenever there's a debate or a contradiction between major sources, I typically don't ask you to go on either side. I just say like, so I won't say like, okay, what type of classification is the coxal bone? Yeah, that's something I'm going to leave up for the anatomist. But the vertebrae, yeah, that's another thing. Does that occur Oh, do wormian bones occur regularly or a result of injury during development? Yeah, so it's not talking about, or actually I should look that up, but it's like typically when you're talking about sutural bones or wormian bones, it's not due to trauma and healing, but they're talking about development. And it just happens that instead of forming one seam and suture together, it formed an extra pocket. Yeah, okay. And let's see, we're running, or maybe we can do some. Let's see, what top hat question do I have lined up here? Okay, don't worry about top hat right now. Let's go. I was just gonna ask you what type of bones are or classified as what. Let's try to finish on bone markings. Okay, so bone markings. So bone markings, you probably, if you're taking the lab, you probably are familiar with these already, but you might be like, okay, not only do we have to know the bones, but all these things, these little parts of a bone. So when I was first learning anatomy, I like to classify these bone markings as bumps versus holes and grooves. So what do I mean by that? So basically, bumps are something that sticks out from the surface of a bone, something pretty prominent and projects out. So this is what I'm thinking about a bump. So there are different names for something that pokes out from a bone or something that's raised on a bone. But and the other major category I have, okay, what's the opposite of something that pokes out? Something that's a puka or a hole, or something that's like a groove. Some sort of that's sunk in from the surface rather than jutting out. So things like little furrows or grooves, or sometimes just a straight up hole in the bone. So what in general, these projections, so the cool thing is that so if you're reading the textbook, you know about the periosteum that helps to anchor tissues to bone. But it's kind of like when you're going rock climbing and having a handhold versus a smooth surface. So these projections often allow tissues to, well, there are many things they can do. One major function of a lot of these projections is they allow things like tendons and ligaments to anchor. So it's easier to anchor something to something that sticks out than grab onto it rather than having a completely flat surface. So tendons and ligaments, these are examples of things that grab onto projections. But some projections, instead of anchoring tissues, they actually fit into another groove or a hole. So they might fit into like a puzzle piece into one of these. So this is like two main things that projections do. They either form an anchor or they fit into something else. Now depressions and openings, well, they can fit projections. So like we mentioned here. So sometimes they're just like they've just fit it like they're the receiving part of a puzzle piece, or they form around things. The thing is that you have that very hard bone matrix in your bone tissues in your body, but things like nerves, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and other squishy tissues have to go through these bones. So sometimes you actually form a protective casing around a softer tissue. So things like organs or blood form passages. So especially with these openings, like if your bones were completely solid without any openings, how would you get blood vessels inside your skull and to and from their skull? So you need some opening of some sort. So this is why you might find these little holes in bones. It's not as that they're trying to make it more porous or it's damaged, but it's trying to make a passage for these vessels to carry things to and from areas. But not only blood vessels, but nerves and lymphatic vessels as well. And oh yeah, it's also sometimes air. Air has to pass through bones. Like otherwise, how would you breathe? Okay, so bone markings. So the other thing is that sometimes not only are they just like whether they project out or whether they're sunken in or a hole, but also the texture of the bone matters as well. So some bone surfaces are smooth and some are very rough. And just like my analogy with the projections, is that sometimes, which is easier to climb, the surface here on the left or the surface here on the right? You probably, well, unless you're really hardcore and you want your fingernails to bleed, you probably would choose the right wall, right? So because, okay, we're going to have these two people race, and who's going to win the race? Or have you seen that race climbing, that crazy stuff at the Olympics? It's just like them flying through and to the top. Yeah, the people with the handholds are good luck to this climber over here if she tries to jump up and get a hold of a flat surface. So what did she do there? She glided off the surface, but this climber over here, she had all this texture and was able to grip on and actually pull herself up. So it's very important so textures and projections often help for other tissues, especially muscles and tendons and ligaments, to grab onto and so that they can actually move bones. Whereas if you have a smooth surface on a bone, it probably is meant to glide over something. So these are general bone markings. I think this is in your slides as well. This is the Martini version. It's a little more thorough than the OpenStax version. But let's cover some of these new vocabularies. So this is a foreman. So what do I have here? I have a foreman. But so I'm thinking like, okay, this is a foreman, and he's like the director of a construction site. And what's he telling the people to do? He's telling the construction workers to dig a hole. So think of that. A foreman tells these construction workers to dig a hole. So a foreman is basically a hole in a bone. Or another nice mnemonic I like is foreman in a hole. So foreman is basically a hole in a bone. And this here is a big foramen we call the foramen magnum. And here are a bunch of vertebrae, and this little hole we have running through them, these are all foramen as well. Or actually the plural of it is foramina. Okay, so these people, they're thinking, right? So they're thinking, they're poking themselves, and they're poking their head. So they are in the blank of thinking. So let's just do the chat. These people are in the blank of thinking. I should actually use that meme with that one guy, like that. Who's that guy? But yeah. These people are in the process of thinking. So they're in the process. So this is the way I like to think of it. A process is something that pokes. So when you're poking yourself, you're in the process of thinking, like if you're doing that. So that's the way I like to think of it. These are all processes. They're poking out and jutting out from somewhere. So that's what we hear, or like this one right here, classic one on the temporal bone right here, is that we have the styloid process. And if you grew up with this, with your good old like 2DS or 3DS, you had that little stylus, right? So that styloid process is something that pokes out. It looks like a stylus, right? So that's why they call it the styloid process. It's kind of shaped like a stylus. Okay, and this over here, this is a big old wave, but what do you call the top of a wave that tumbles over? That very, very top of a wave. So you call that the crest. And the crest, oh, hey, we have that coxal bone, that hip bone. And this is actually part of the hip bone we call the ilium. And what do we have on the top when it comes over and crests at the very top? It's what we call the iliac crest. Now spine is very interesting. So here's a book, and where's the spine of a book? So the spine of a book you see over here. Now the spine, where do you find these spines? It's kind of like this solid ridge, and here's the hip bone again. So there's actually multiple spines on the hip bone, but they're all kind of like solid borders and edges. And where do you also find a spine? Actually, this is super important, especially if you were planning on going into like kinesiology or orthopedics or physical therapy. So this spine of the scapula, this is kind of like the spine of a book. It's kind of this thick, prominent ridge that forms a lot of support. And here we have tubers. So all of these, like even our kalo and sweet potato, yams, these are all, and our ever famous potatoes, these are all examples of tubers. And why do I bring up tubers? Well, there are two landmarks that are kind of named like tubers. So tubercle. So you might be like, what the heck is a tubercle? So this is the way I think of it. A tubercle is like a tuber, but it's like small, like a lump of coal. Then say you have a bunch of tubers and they decide to grow together and make a community, and they now make a new city. So what happens when you get a group of tubers together and they form a bigger mass? They form a tuberosity. I know, it's bad. But the main point here is that in general, a tuberosity is bigger than a tubercle. So the tubercle smaller than a tuberosity. They're both kind of rough shaped bumps on a bone. Okay, so brace yourself. So what would you call an even bigger mountain of tubers? Well, so here we have a big mountain, and it's actually a big mound of tubers. And what we have here, so here's a mound of tuber, and then what happens is that we have this chanter going up there. She's going to go up there, do her oli, do her chant, and at the very end of it, she's going to take a tuber and throw it off. So she's a chanter, right? So she took a tuber and throw it off. So she's a trochanter. I know, it's really bad. But which is biggest, a mountain or a city? So again, so this is kind of like, if I could rename it, I would say like, okay, it was like, basically it's like small, medium, large. Small bump, medium bump, large bump. But again, this is like trochanters are the largest, roughest type of these projections. Tuberosities, not as big as trochanters, but still bigger than tubercles. Tubercles, the smallest of these projections. All right, so this is what we have here. So so here you have these tubercles. Notice that they're very small. So again, tubercles, a tuber the size of a coal. But the tuberosities, they're generally very bigger than these smaller tubercles. And the trochanter, I know my trochanter, she's on the mountain that's the biggest of all of these lumps. So that's what we have here with the trochanter. And then let's finish up the rest. So if you have the lab, don't worry. Just this will I'm going to try to finish up the rest of the landmarks. Okay, so fossa. So I like to think of this. Oh, look at this, like super gothic. But fossa, I like using this because it's like, okay, a fossa is kind of like a smooth basin. So some sort of smooth, curved surface inside of a bone. So I like to think of that. Here's a faucet. It's dumping into a fossa. And ooh, what's she doing? She's giving sour face, right? So she's sulking. So when you sulk, what happens to your face? It starts to form all of these thin lines. So sulcus, and actually this comes in handy when we cover neuroanatomy, is one of those depressions and those small grooves. So it's a very, very fine lines in the bone. And then, ooh, okay, another story time. So this is your friend, and her name is Connie. Apologies if your name is Connie. But she's kind of special. She's always kind of like into the latest, like she reads too much of these forums, and she's always worried that people are, and she's like super paranoid about COVID and everything. So she's so paranoid about getting anything that she dials with her fingers. But she dials in a very particular way. When she dials, she uses her knuckles because she's so afraid of getting anything on her fingertips. So she's a Connie, and she's dialing with her knuckles. And hey, what's a condyle? A condyle is a knuckle. So think of that. Your friend Connie is dialing with her knuckles. So there are certain bumps that are shaped like knuckles, and they kind of project like knuckles. So they're not actually like, so here we have the femur, and they have two processes called condyles. So they are special ones, and they're smooth because they're actually meant to glide on surface. And facet, so ooh, I should have to look at Connie of EOT. Facet, so when you have like a gem and you say it's like has all these facets, it has all these planes and sides and smooth surfaces. So facet on a bone is one of those smooth surfaces. Again, if you have something that's rough and textured, it's meant for something to grip on. But if you have something that's smooth, it's supposed to glide, right? So facets are like that. And meatus, I learned this from a student, but I like this mnemonic so much. So meatus, think of it this way, like, so where do you find a meatus? Like the external auditory meatus. It's basically a passage from the outside to your tympanic membrane inside your ear, right? So what happens is that meatus in the hallway, before social distancing, I should put masks on all of them now. But yeah, meatus, think of it as like a hallway or a passage. So tell your friends, meet us in the hallway. Yeah, I should actually update this like with COVID times. Before times. Anyway. So here is a canal, and hey, a canal is a passageway, right? So a canal is also a passageway through bone as well. And what we have here where we have a crack in the earth. And when you have sort of something that looks like a crack in a bone, but it's actually on purpose, it's not due to trauma, it's what we call a fissure. So sometimes there are certain, they're kind of rough looking compared to smooth other depressions and grooves. So fissures are basically smooth, rough projections or rough openings in bone compared to like things like foramina. Okay, so I think this is a good time to call time for now. Thank you for staying 5 minutes overtime for Friday. But yeah, Connie from AOT. Yeah, I should have looked that up. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the toughest things when you're first learning actually anything in anatomy because you're getting these new words that you're like, oh, what the heck does this mean? So what I'd like to do is come up with these mnemonics until it becomes second nature. Stung by a bee and needs an EpiPen, and then you take the epicondyle. Ooh, that's a good one. Okay. All right, so again, these are all bone markings. So it's not just about bones, but again, why do we have to know markings? They're very important, especially if you're talking about if you're going on to advanced classes where you're going to have to know about muscle insertions and origins. Hey, there are often where muscles attach to and grip onto. So this is why it's important to know these markings as well, all right? Okay, so now we get to start the full hardcore anatomies. We're going to cover the skeleton next week, and then joints, and then muscle tissue, then muscles, until and again, our final, or not final, our exam 2 is on, was it the 29th, I believe? So we still have 4 months, so it's mostly anatomy from this point on. Okay, have a great weekend. Take care of your bones, take care of your skin, take care of your immune system, take care of everything, all right? See you on Monday.